Hey friend, it's Michael, and I've got a question for you to consider. When I say the phrase, hold onto your beliefs lightly, what emotions immediately rise up in you? Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore how we communicate well. What we have been taught about communication and what has been modeled and incentivized through our culture has left us in a place where we know how to exert our ideas and opinions and beliefs onto each other, but we miss the other half of conversation, the extraction. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before. To teach you how to ask curious questions, how to seek understanding over certainty, and how to listen and give space so that ultimately you might become a better communicator. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and what we stand for, rather than what we are against. If you live in the United States, I want you to think back and consider, have you ever uttered the phrase, "It's a free country," either as a sort of permission to someone to do something that they want to do, or as a justification for your own actions? Now, if you're not in the US, perhaps other phrases might sound familiar or parallel. You do you. You only live once. YOLO, right? Which I understand greatly dates me as the elder millennial that I am. But do what you gotta do. That's just my opinion. Help me out here. I don't even know if these sayings are a thing anywhere outside the US, as I admit I am without a doubt a sheltered American in many ways, having traveled outside of the country a grand total of twice in my life. But if you've ever heard or said these expressions, have you ever thought of the unspoken message they deliver? There's an undertone of an individualistic, self-serving, dare I say, entitled mindset about not just our actions, but our beliefs and opinions, isn't there? It's almost as if it's our right to be self-interested above all else and unchallenged in that way of moving about the world. But what of our responsibilities to others? Do those even exist? Or what of our responsibilities to question ourselves? Is that a thing? Well, in this episode, I welcome back Andy Norman. Now, Andy was my guest back in episode 65 when we discussed his book, Mental Immunity, and he's the co-founder and CEO of the Mental Immunity Project. And Andy is back to provide an update on the field of mental immunity and where the science has gone in the 2 years since our first conversation. Andy and I discuss belief attachment and its role in driving us to be, for one thing, more unthinkingly binary in how we view complex issues, and in another, how we are indiscriminately suspicious of new ideas. As I write about in my new book, Can I Ask a Question?, it stems from this agreement we make with ourselves that our opinions are evidence enough for a thought, idea, or assumption to be true, as if belief alone proves or provides us certainty. And it can feel very unsettling to challenge those beliefs. What Andy advocates for in this conversation is what he calls a shades of gray mindset or shades of gray thinking as a way to invite in nuance and dig out of a binary mindset where you're forced to have all the answers all the time, which, by the way, simply isn't possible. At the core of Andy's message is a call to hold on to beliefs lightly and be willing to challenge them, not to necessarily prove yourself wrong, but to be more adept at recognizing when and why your capacity to think critically might be weakened or perhaps even intentionally hijacked. Andy, I'm thrilled that you are back. It's been a couple years since you and I last connected, but I want to, I guess, start here by saying I took the mental immunity quiz on the Mental Immunity Project website. I got a 3.6 out of 5. I got to tell you, I'm a little disappointed in that.
Well, if you take it a few times, I bet you may learn how to raise your score, and then
Game it
you'll.
a little bit.
Well, it's gaming it a little bit, but it's also learning a little bit. You'll learn a little bit in the process about how our minds fight off bad ideas and
Yeah.
ideologies in particular. Well, so just for your listeners' context, Michael's referring to the Mental Immunity Challenge, which is a simple 10 question quiz designed by cognitive scientists to measure how resistant you are to uh, misinformation, but more broadly, sort of ideological thinking. So we haven't validated the tool yet, so it's not. I can't promise that any particular result is scientifically valid, but I think it's a really interesting way to kind of, if you've ever wondered how susceptible you are to mis or disinformation, this is a good way to get an early uh, indication, early if imperfect indication, and at least suggest some areas where you might benefit from improvement.
Yeah, Andy, I thought the questions themselves brought up more for me than actual getting the score. I sat there considering the questions of, "Oh, this is actually not something I've ever asked myself before."
They're kind of
How
philosophical, aren't they?
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did you go about designing those questions? Was that the intent?
Um, Intent, no. But if you think about how human beings process information and either choose to believe stuff or not, um, you run into certain patterns, certain habits of mind sort of show up again and again. Like, so are you prone to telling yourself, "Yeah, I'm entitled to believe what I want, so it's okay if I believe this"? If you're prone to saying that to yourself, um, that has implications for your mental life downstream. Some people are very prone to saying that, and a lot of times they end up rationalizing having some kind of sketchy beliefs. So I'm entitled to my beliefs can protect a sketchy belief from revision or criticism. But those who are prone to say, yeah, I may or may not be legally entitled to believe this, but it's important to me to believe responsibly instead, they develop a whole different set of habits of mind, and those habits of mind that come along with the second mantra are conducive to a more critical and reflective mindset. And I think in today's digital age, it's especially important that we all kind of work on that a little bit.
You used the word, responsible there, or responsibility. I saw on the website that that's one of the core tenets. I don't remember exactly what you called them, but that's one of the 10 core, um,
Yes, we call.
tenets tenets of mental immunology
That's right.
is taking responsibility. Can
Yes.
you dive into that a little bit more and just what that means for us as consumers of information, as citizens of the United States? Like, what do you mean by taking that level of responsibility?
Yeah, so we're inclined to think that our beliefs are our own private business and nobody else should mess with us. That should mess with our right to believe things. And of course the idea that we're entitled to our opinions, that's repeated so endlessly that almost all of us come to the question of how should I conduct my mental affairs with a sense of entitlement.
Hmm.
But when you start thinking deeply about the way in which our beliefs affect our behavior and the way in which our behaviors affect other people, you start to realize that believing responsibly is actually an essential element of morality. So it's not enough to simply believe whatever you want and then try to control your behavior, just before it impacts other people. You actually need to um, choose your beliefs, vet your beliefs carefully, and vet your information carefully,
Hmm.
strive to believe responsibly, and then just act naturally. Then kind of treating other people well becomes almost natural. So it's important that we all kind of develop an ethic of belief that says, you know what, just when my neighbors develop irresponsible beliefs, that can harm me. So I need to be careful not to adopt harmful beliefs because they might affect my neighbors. It's basic reciprocity. I'll be responsible for my thinking. You be responsible for your thinking, and we'll both end up better off.
I repeat this quite often, and tell me if this makes sense as I'm tying the strings together in my mind. I often repeat the phrase, "It's fine if we always ask the question, 'Can we?' And the answer may be yes or no, but we don't often go far enough and then ask the next question, which is, 'Should we?'"
Yeah, yes.
It does that flow into a little bit of what you're talking about there, about our responsibility to take an idea or belief or information and make it a belief?
Yeah, yeah. For philosophers like me, just love to play around with the should we type questions, and we're not as good always at the can we questions. I joke in my book that my wife, who is really good at getting things done, she calls me a flaming clarifier because I'm so busy clarifying I never get anything done. I call her a flaming implementer because she's so busy getting shit done that she never bothers to wonder whether it's worth getting done.
I I laugh so hard because that's a lot of how my wife and I are. I'm the I'm the go and just get it done guy, and she's the, "Well, but what about this?"
Yeah, but it's nice to be partnered with somebody like that who has a different skill
Yes,
set and you learn a lot from a spouse like that, right?
you absolutely do. 100% there. Andy, you talked about our sense of entitlement.
Yeah.
Is that a Where does that come from? Is that a uniquely American thing? Are we seeing that globally? Where does that sense of entitlement come from?
Yeah, it's certainly true that grew out of America was founded by people who are deeply influenced by Enlightenment ideals. And Enlightenment philosophy, Enlightenment ideas are often considered to be very individualistic, right? I'm entitled to do what I want. You're entitled to do what you want, just as long as we don't step on each other's toes. That's kind of the basic principle of a free society. Um, and that's a really good principle as far as it goes, because the problem is if you start feeling so entitled to your freedom, so entitled to do or think or say what you want, that you start not noticing that you're stepping on other people's toes, right? So I have a problem with libertarianism, which almost makes a fetish of entitlement, or it makes a fetish of freedom. If we're all so free to do what we want that we end up transgressing against each other because, hey, if I want to steal your stuff, I'm entitled to do that too, right? I mean, I'm not saying
Mhm.
any libertarians think it quite that explicitly, but I think many libertarians are so allergic to responsibilities that they emphasize rights to the exclusion of responsibilities. And and America is largely a semi-libertarian culture built around a semi-libertarian set of ideals. And that has many benefits, but it also has some drawbacks. And we need to know how to combine our rights and responsibilities, or our entitlements and our obligations. Um, in I think we need to bring those back into balance. There are many Eastern cultures that take we're all in this together, so we all have responsibilities to look out for the common good, that take that ideal much more seriously than Americans do. And I think America could use for a would benefit from a course correction that accepted that our rights or our entitlements don't always trump our responsibilities.
Hmm. Was there ever a time when it did work, perhaps as intended in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pendulum swings back and forth. Well, I mean, I think there are subcultures, there are pockets where rights and responsibilities come into harmonious balance, and
Mm.
then people tend to do well in those places. But there are other places where rights run rampant over responsibilities, and people get start transgressing against each other. And there are other places where responsibilities run roughshod over rights, and then you can end up with like a totalitarian or an authoritarian regime. That's problematic too. So healthy societies are always um, a complex mix of rights and responsibilities,
Mhm.
often with very subtle trade-offs between the two. And when we, for example, adopt the view that regulation is bad, that's an attempt to do away with a huge class of responsibilities. But it's like taking an axe to a bonsai tree, right? I mean, you need to be much more discriminating in our aversion to regulation because some regulations are good. Look, my heart regulates the flow of my blood. That's a good thing.
Very good.
Traffic lights keep us from smashing into each other. By regulating traffic, that too is a good thing. Some regulation is good, and we should not have an allergic negative reaction to the whole idea of regulation.
As we get a little bit more into, because I want to go here, I want to go towards where the science has gone since we last spoke in the field of cognitive immunology and mental immunity.
Mhm.
But one of the things that came up on that little challenge score that I got was it said that while I scored well, 3.6 out of 5, I may have some characteristics of what is called belief attachment.
Yes.
Can you describe that? What is that? What is the yeah, what is that?
Yeah, so we all get kind of fond of our beliefs and prone to hang on to them maybe sometimes longer than we should. And there are evolutionary reasons for this. If our ancestors had given up on their beliefs too quickly, that might have prevented them from developing sort of robust um, models of the world, mental models of the world around them. So we shouldn't actually give up our beliefs at the drop of a hat. That's true, but it's also true that we tend to cling to our beliefs often more tenaciously than we should. Um, so our beliefs have gotten us. I mean, here's a sort of a subconscious thought process that I think helps to structure many people's thinking. My beliefs have got me this far. They're
Mhm.
probably pretty good. And so this new information that casts doubt upon them, that's probably BS. So then you start disregarding the kind of information that might help you actually learn and grow or become more nuanced in your outlook. So,
Mhm.
so many beliefs are sort of fine within certain limits. But if you apply them outside those limits, they cannot start to backfire. So I think it's important to recognize that I like to say treat your beliefs as house guests that might wear out their welcome at some point. Um, sure, maybe they're good friends. Maybe they deserve to be house guests for the rest of your life. Well, I put the number that deserve to be in that category as a very small number.
Very low.
Maybe like the golden rule or something, right? Um, Most beliefs will prove to be of limited usefulness when you think about them hard enough or think about applying them in different cases. So it's a good idea to hold your beliefs gently, lightly, and be willing to rethink them when an opportunity to rethink them comes along. People who do that, um, psychologists call this the growth mindset. People who do that tend to learn more over time and be more successful in a lot of. And I hope doesn't come as a uh, as critical or anything. It sounds like the mental immunity challenge, when it indicated that you might have an issue with belief attachment,
Mhm.
don't take that as a slam in any way. It just means that you answered one of the questions in a way suggest that, like most of us, you can get pretty attached to your beliefs.
Sure.
Um, and I like to say that, exposure to the idea that belief over attachment is a bigger threat to us than belief under attachment for the most part. We tend to
Ah,
be
okay.
more attached to our beliefs than is warranted. And once you understand that, you bring a slightly more open minded outlook to life, I think.
So then why does belief under attachment feel so darn dangerous, Andy?
That's a really wonderful question, Michael. And so we as philosophers tend not to feel that sort of thing as dangerous. So we like to ask tough questions, and we love the idea of evolving our beliefs
Yeah.
and letting go of our current beliefs and replacing them with maybe even better ones. So I don't think I'm particularly prone to that thought that it's scary to let go of our beliefs, but I know that many do.
Mhm.
And I think philosophers are probably the outliers here, um, and possibly in ways that aren't always healthy. But um, there's a story about I forget how this goes. Guy falls down a well and he grabs onto a root sticking out of the side of the well, and he's worried that if he lets go of the root, he'll fall to his death. He's in the dark. He doesn't know how far down the bottom of the well is, and eventually he decides, well, I can't hang on forever, so he lets go and he drops like 6 inches, and it turns out not to be that scary to let go after all. It turns
Mm.
out letting go wasn't that awful after all. I think so. It's not as though when we let go of a belief, we replace it with nothing. What you do is you try to formulate a replacement belief that's more accurate or even better functioning. And so you're not left high and dry if you do it right. What you do is you end up just say moving your thinking from this particular point, which seemed like it ought to be a fixed point forever and ever, to a neighboring point that does a lot of the work of the original belief, but that it also frees you up in some ways. Does that make sense?
You're speaking my language here. What I'm gathering from this, and tell me if I'm wording this correctly. The too much of the belief for people that do see that as a scary proposition is that I must switch wholeheartedly from this one thing and believe the opposite, and it becomes a binary
Ah,
decision. And what you just detailed there, to go from this fixed point in time or place to this little adjacent point that still holds a lot of the same characteristics, but is just that much more nuanced or that much more complex. We're not
yes,
talking about a dualistic state, are we?
exactly. And one of the principles of a healthy mental immune care is to adopt shades of gray thinking. So try not to think in
Mhm.
absolutes or black and white. Um, what the world's best, there's some fascinating work that's been done about how some of the world's best predictors, so the people who develop really sophisticated mental models of how the world works, and they're really good at predicting what's going to happen next, what they do that most of us don't do enough of is constantly they always think in terms of probabilities. Yeah, this is, I'm about 85% confident this is true. I wouldn't say I know it, but I think it's true, right?
Mhm.
And it's 85, and then some new information comes in, and they go, oh, I got to nudge that from 85 down to 82. They're constantly letting their confidence levels float a little higher, a little lower as new information comes in. And the whole thing becomes more fluid, but it still retains its integrity and its usefulness because you're not throwing out babies with bathwater. You're not
Yeah.
throwing out everything. Is that right?
I'm reminded of people getting exasperated at the weather report when they look out a week from, tomorrow, and they're like, "Okay, well it's going to be 75 degrees and sunny." And then 3 days later, well, it's going to be 72 and partly cloudy. And
Yeah.
then the day before, well, it's actually going to be 65 and rainy for most of the day, but there's going to be a little bit of sun in the afternoon. It's just people get mad at that, but that is meteorologists and weather reporters taking in a little bit more information as we get closer, and the prediction becomes more confident as you get closer to that date, doesn't it?
That's a beautiful example, right? Yeah, so most meteorologists, people who know about long-term forecasts, know not to put a lot of stock in the 7-day forecasts,
Yeah.
right? You put much more stock in the 10-hour forecast than the 10-day forecast. Um, yeah,
But when we're planning our vacations, Andy, we want that 7-day forecast.
touche, Mike. Fair point. Fair point. If only the world were completely inherently predictable and there was no
Right?
uncertainty in the world, everything would be great.
Right? So, you tell me if I'm wrong in this thinking, or off or going down the right path. It
Mhm.
seems like those beliefs become scary to people, to challenge those beliefs when we begin to inch our way out of our tribe, out of our
Yes.
social circle, the people we know, like, and trust. When we begin to diverge a little bit from them in challenging or rethinking a belief, that's when it seems like, no, no, this is my identity. I identify with this. We identify with this. I can't. This is who I am.
Yeah.
It's gotten me to use your language. It's gotten me to this point. Is that a precursor to kind of some of this belief attachment?
Well, yeah, and when the beliefs of your fellow tribesmen, whether or not to hang on to the beliefs that have linked you to your political tribe or your religious tribe, um, it's especially hard to revise those because you fear losing your friends, you fear
Right.
losing your tribe. And there are evolutionary reasons why we're especially deferential to the views of those around us. Almost every one of us is significantly conformist in our thinking because we don't
Mhm.
want to be out. It's not adaptive to have a belief system that's completely out of alignment with everybody else's.
Right.
You need people who think like you do. We all need people who think like us. And we all tend to gravitate towards the beliefs of the people around us. And sometimes this leads to groupthink, which is a dangerous distortion of good thinking. Um, but it matters that our beliefs align with those we want to collaborate with, those we want to coexist with. Um, so it's understandable that it would be hard to part with the beliefs that define a tribal identity. And all of the research suggests that's what the hardest. I mean, that's where the rubber really hits the road and
Mhm.
things get really hard. Um, but blind tribal allegiance can actually just mess up your mind. It can close your mind. It can skew your thinking. It can mess up your estimation of the likelihoods of things. It can mess up your ability to predict. And we've actually, I think, seen in just the last couple of decades that a lot of people's thinking goes completely haywire because their tribe wants takes this or that to be, I don't know, orthodoxy or something that you must accept in order to remain in good standing in the group.
To be one of us.
One of us. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Andy, you mentioned the research, and I wanna go there. Where has the science gone since we last spoke in this field? What is it showing you? What is it showing us about our ability to mete out misinformation, disinformation, and immunize ourselves against, um, everything that we've been talking about so far?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I'm glad you asked. So in my book, so last time I was on your show, I talked about my book, which is titled Mental Immunity. And in that
Yes.
book, I propose a new science of immunity to misinformation. I call that science cognitive immunology. you've dropped a reference to that.
Hmm.
And since then, in just the 2 years since, scholars from all over the world have come together and kind of rallied around my vision for this field. We're now saying things like, you know what, the mind has an evolved immune system of its own, and it's designed to spot and weed out bad information, but it doesn't always work right. Under certain conditions, it can work really, really well. Under other conditions, it can work really, really poorly. And we have to understand this to get by in the internet age, in the digital, in an age where misinformation can spread virally in minutes across the globe. So I think it's almost a survival skill now. We have to we all have to up our game. We need to get better at spotting misinformation, and and the science is telling us how to do that. Um, I'll just give you one example. So
Yeah.
here's what we do with kids today: you stick them in schools, and then you just feed them a steady diet of good information all day long for 20 years, and you just say,
Memorize.
"Remember all this."
Yep.
Retain all this, write it all down, spit it back on tests. What kids don't get in a situation like that is they don't learn how to deal with bad information, and they don't learn how to spot bad information. So I have a colleague who's wonderful at this. She said she always mixes in red herrings into her teaching, and then kind of challenges her students to spot them. Right. Um, so here's one of her really fun activities. She teaches her students how conspiracy theories work, and then she says, "All right, guys, break up into groups and design your own conspiracy theory. Make it a spoof conspiracy theory, something that isn't going to harm anybody, nothing that's really going to hijack anybody's mind." But the kids learn a little bit about how mind hijacking belief systems work, and they try to create one, and they try to fool each other, but it's all kind of jokey and fun. um, and at the end of the week, you can test them, and it turns out they're much more immune to truly dangerous conspiracy theories because they can spot them now. Does that make sense?
It does.
So let kids play with bad ideas. Let them experience um, ideas that have ways of getting their hooks into our minds and messing with our thinking, and but do it with innocuous versions. So in the same way that a
Right.
vaccine involves you kill a virus and use the dead virus to teach the body's immune system how to spot them. That way, nobody gets hurt. Well, we can do the same thing with ideas. Take a spoof conspiracy like birds aren't real. You may have heard of this,
Yes.
right? And nobody gets hurt, but people start to realize, oh my God, I mean, people take this kind of thing seriously. Yeah, and guess what? There are a whole bunch of other conspiracy theories out there that really are messing up people's thinking. Watch out for them, kids. Okay, and then so this is called mind inoculation, or uh, it's also called pre-bunking.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Very
And
interesting.
and all the research suggests that an ounce of pre-bunking is worth a pound of debunking. So it's much better to kind of help kids learn what the hazards are before they get infected with, I don't know, say cult beliefs,
Sure.
than to try to deprogram them from a cult, which is really hard work.
Really, really difficult. Then you're talking about change. You're talking about changing somebody, which is much, much more difficult.
Yes.
Andy, it flows into what I'm writing in my book currently, where I talk about our education system and how it is so lacking in teaching us the ability to communicate with each other, because so
Yes.
much of it is the exertion of an idea on someone rather than the other half of conversation, which is the extraction. It is take this subject and go find me everything that shows me that this is right and true, prove it, rather than how might you question this? What might someone else believe,
Yeah.
or think, or what might be a different way to approach this?
Yes.
In some ways, in math, you're probably always going to get one answer. There's one right way to do it. In a lot of science, like geology, I've got to imagine minerals are always going to be the same, the same compositional makeup. But in things like empathy and understanding and and where ideas come, like all of these things that we've been talking about, there needs to be another side of communication that is not being taught,
Yes.
which is the extraction out of other people.
Well,
And so
I think you're even more right than you know, because even in geology and mathematics, when experts get together and test each other's ideas and challenge each other's ideas, often they
yeah,
start to spot mistakes that they miss. So the back and forth is essential, even there.
I love it. I love it. The conditions where an immune system weakens, a cognitive immune system weakens, I should say.
Mhm.
What are those conditions? What are the conditions that cause our mind's immune system to break down? This is particularly relevant to me because I'm just getting over a cold, so I'm all about the immune system
Yeah,
right now.
yeah, right.
Yeah, what conditions are present
Yeah,
where we begin to
culture.
falter?
Yeah, sorry. Culture wars uh, degrade mental immune systems rapidly. When people start taking sides and being unthinkingly partisan. I mean, look, thinking is really the mind's immune. So, what thinking critically is like the mind's immune system in action.
Mm,
And when we make time to think, when you postpone a gut level reaction, when you pause before you fire back an angry response to a tweet, you insert a moment of reflection in place of the reaction that might otherwise take hold of you. And then an opportunity arises for a more careful and judicious reply.
mm,
That's basic thinking, but it's also really good communication um, practice. When you're trying to say, work out some tricky issues with a partner, um, if you if you launch into what they're saying, split second after they finish speaking, the relationship isn't going to flourish. Far better to hear your partner out, nod a few times, and say, "Yeah, yeah, I can see where you're coming from on that. There's a lot of truth to that. Have you thought about it this way also?" Right? Um, I mean, there are ways of engaging one another that allow us to resolve our differences constructively. And our culture right now has lost track of those things. I think in part because of the pace of
mm.
our digital worlds, we don't pause to have slow, thoughtful, meaningful conversations as often as we used to. So I think it's important that we make time for those conversations. It's one of the reasons I'm enjoying this exchange so much,
Yeah.
because you ask really thoughtful follow up questions. Um,
I would hope so. I would hope
yeah,
so, and that's the name of the program, right?
right.
Andy, I love I wrote that down, postpone your gut reaction. I I love how that's worded, and you're right, it is in direct, um it feels in direct conflict with how we are incentivized to the opposite.
Yeah, yeah. Responding quickly often seems like the key to, I don't know, authoring content that can go viral these days, right?
Mhm,
And in fact, the more inflammatory and injudicious it is, the more likely it is to trigger other people and thereby go viral. So there are all these incentives built into the way we've built the internet and social media in particular that aren't helping us think better. They're actively damaging our ability to think. And this mental immunity project of ours is designed to sort of remind us of some of the basic habits of mind that can make us all better thinkers. Nobody's mastered any one of these 10 to the complete extent,
hmm,
but every single one of us can get better at doing these things in little ways every day. And if you just make a little bit of improvement on these dimensions every day, you become wiser and wiser over time. Um, and And if we all took that sort of patient approach to growing ourselves and becoming better people, um, I think we could transform our world. I'm really optimistic about what we can do together. Our mental immunity project.org website offers a set of tools for anybody who wants to take their thinking to a deeper level. And we have some really fun, engaging ways to kind of learn what those principles are, how to follow them every day. My colleague, Melanie Tressa King, who I think might be appearing on your show. Am I?
Possibly, yes.
Yeah.
We haven't connected yet, but hope to.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. She's just really, so I'm a bit of an egghead, kind of a, I've marinated too long in higher education. So sometimes I use big words when I shouldn't, but she's really good at taking this stuff and making it so everybody not just gets it, but really feels it.
Andy, as you were describing all of that, the thought that was running through my mind, and maybe this is getting too much into the physiology of it and not necessarily the philosophy of it, but
Mhm.
it seems like the ways that we are incentivized right now are hijacking our minds, um, almost like a drug would,
Yeah.
and and giving us a false sense of immunity, a
Hmm.
false sense of rightness, in that belief attachment. So I'll ask the question along those same lines: how do we detox? I know
Mm.
pre-bunking is better than debunking, but how do we detox from the drug of how we are incentivized right now that makes us feel right and righteous and,
Yeah.
yeah, all those things?
I'm going to reflect for a moment on why that's such a good question before I try to answer it, because I'm going to try to buy myself a little bit of time for the harder task. No, it's a really good question because um, our brains actually produce drugs that it's called dopamine. There's a
Right.
chemical that our brains produce to reward us when we do something satisfying, or um, sex, drugs, rock and roll. These things give us dopamine hits and make us want to come back and do more sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? Um, the social media companies have learned how to create algorithms and feeds that make you just scroll and scroll and scroll. And you get a little dopamine hit every time you see something that you like. And
Mhm.
it's made, in fact, the designers of these social media platforms have come out. Some of them have come out and said, we were deliberately for years putting some of the best minds on the planet to work on the task of how do we make these platforms as addictive as possible.
Yeah.
And addictive here means they feed you a steady diet of the brain chemicals that make you want to come back and do it more. So the addiction is real. The tox is real. And you ask a wonderful question with how do we detox? Um, let's start simple. I've talked to some people who just basically went on a 2 week hiatus from social media and found that they were happier.
Mm.
That's cold turkey detox, but it seems to work for some.
Yeah.
I try to limit my social media intake. Um, I also try to limit my time online more
Mhm.
generally. And I hate my new iPhone 14 because to close an app, you swipe up from the bottom, which is exactly the same movement you do to scroll up on uh, in say Facebook
Yes, you do.
or in on YouTube.
Instagram, Twitter, which is now X, or YouTube, all of them as you're scrolling up.
So a lot of times I want to close this app so I can get control of my mind and my attention again, and you actually end up just going to the next thing. It's actually very cleverly designed to keep you there.
Mm.
I'm trying to become more mindful of that. And of course, practitioners of mindfulness, meditation, yoga, things like this have said that uh, what's the word I'm looking for? That that managing your attention thoughtfully is the key to living life well.
Mm.
Insofar as we allow angry emotions to hijack our attention, we tend to make ourselves miserable. Insofar as we allow social media giants to hijack our attention, they tend to make us miserable. Insofar as demagogues get us angry and bitter and resentful of one another, that can hijack our attention and make us miserable. So the common denominator here is that if things out there, whether they're ideas or people or political parties or whatever, that are out there hijacking your attention and using addiction to maintain it, you have to seize control of your life again. You have to say, wait a minute, I only get so many hours on this earth, and I don't want to waste it all doom scrolling. That is not a good use of my life.
Mm.
You, repeating that to yourself, every a few times a week, and then translating it into action, we actually close the social media app and put the phone aside, I think can go a long way. I don't think so. Smartphones and social media are unadulterated evil. I kind of like both of them in small doses. And I think there are healthy ways to interact with these very enticing and seductive new technologies, but you have to be mindful, or they can take over your mind.
Yeah. If you're constantly throwing down your phone after doom scrolling on Instagram and getting angry every single time, well, that may be a sign that you
That's right.
need to take some time away.
Exactly. Exactly.
Andy, cognitive immunology is not without its detractors.
Hmm.
I read a rebuttal to your work that then you published a rebuttal in Psychology Today, and I read that. um, but what do the people who critique your work, what do they say is missing from mental immunology, and how would you respond?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so a colleague of mine named, to give this a story form, one of my collaborators is a Cambridge University psychologist named Sander van der Linden, and he's written a book recently called Foolproof, and it's all about how we fall for misinformation and how to develop immunity to misinformation. So he's actually the world's most cited psychologist. He's phenomenally good and successful.
Mhm.
But a philosopher named Dan Williams authored a scathing review of van der Linden's book and published it in Boston Review. Um, I thought that review was distinctly unfair to Sander, so I teamed up with a colleague, Lee McIntyre, a philosopher and collaborator, and we wrote a rebuttal or reply to Dan
Mhm.
Williams. Let me see if I can do Williams's criticism justice, while also in a relatively short time try to say why I don't think it succeeds. Um, I think many people think there are limits to the idea that bad ideas are like mind parasites or mind viruses. So in my book, I say, in a very, very real sense, bad ideas are mind parasites.
Right.
For many people react to that idea with aversion. You mean my brain is infected with parasites? My mind is infected with parasites? That's a scary thought. So some people are opposed to my way of thinking about this just because it's scary.
Hmm.
Others grant that there's a certain amount of truth to the idea that bad ideas are mind parasites, but then they object to the idea that the mind really does have an immune system of its own. So, and there are sophisticated philosophical ways of objecting to that, and Dan Williams offers some of them. Um, if you understand what I really mean by that, though, a lot of those criticisms go away. So, when I say the mind has an immune system of its own, I just mean that there are evolved subsystems that are pretty good at spotting misinformation and screening it out under certain conditions. And I want to call those immune systems. I'm borrowing the language of immunology to flesh
Right,
out, and then
right.
using the analogy. The analogy turns out to be amazingly rich and robust, and is helping scientists deepen their thinking on this. And that's why I champion it. We'll eventually find that metaphor has limits, I'm sure, and there are probably ways to take that analogy that are not wise, or to take that analogy so seriously that it's unwise. And I appreciate people like Dan Williams and others of my colleagues who warn us against the dangers of seductive metaphors and say, don't be too hasty about embracing this hook, line, and sinker. That's all. Uh, I appreciate where that's coming from.
Yeah.
Williams's critique of van der Linden boils down to this. He disagrees with Sanders' claim that misinformation has distinctive characteristics that we can learn to recognize. So Williams basically says misinformation has no inherent differences. So van der Linden's project of trying to teach us how to sort out the misinformation from the good information is inherently flawed. I argued in response that no, misinformation really does have distinguishing characteristics, and we can get better at spotting them. I mean, you have to look at the information in context and consider often many different considerations to definitively confirm that it is misinformation rather than disinformation. But van der Linden is very good at telling us, hey, be on the lookout for example, information that inflames your passions, that inflames your anger, because that's a very common manipulation technique. And a lot of people end up absorbing misinformation because it comes cloaked in strong emotion. So learn to notice when a piece of information makes you angry and say, hang on a second here. Maybe this is not something I should accept and react to. Maybe I should think twice or three times about this before I accept it. That habit of mind can spare you a ton of stress and folly and bad decisions.
Yeah. And real quick for me, the difference between misinformation and disinformation. There is a difference. How do you define that? I want
Yes.
to make sure we all are clear on our understanding there.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, so the standard way of distinguishing the two is that disinformation is intentionally misleading. So when people try to use information to manipulate you, that's disinformation. But when people just absorb a piece of bad information and pass it along unwittingly, that's just misinformation.
Gotcha.
So there's often nefarious intent behind disinformation.
Disinformation. One of the things that I do to challenge myself is I will go to, I would say the three major mass media networks right now are CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. I like to go to each one of their websites whenever a big story hits and just see how they report the headline.
And how those headlines differ, right?
How those headlines differ.
Nice.
And the emotional play, the polarizing play, the partisan play that each one of them takes just shows you that we can take the same set of facts and information, and whether intentional or unwittingly bad information or not, you just need to have that filter turned on, don't you?
Yeah. Well, the filter that says, hang on a second here, that seems inflammatory.
Yes.
Maybe this is biased.
Yes.
Yeah, we all need that filter now more than ever before. And Sanders' book is a wonderful resource for learning how to strengthen those filters. And our Mental Immunity Project webpage is, I think, another place where you can really learn the basics. I mean, look, the cool thing about this is it doesn't have to be a chore. It can be fun.
Yeah.
Philosophers learn to love the play of challenges and responses. We learn to actually enjoy disagreeing, which makes us very unusual critters, right? But it is possible to enjoy. Um, it's possible to enjoy disagreeing constructively. We can disagree, as our former President Obama used to say, we need to disagree without becoming disagreeable.
Hmm, I love that.
So,
Where where do you see the science of mental immunity going now?
um,
Where is it heading from this point forward?
I'm going to share my broad aspirational answer to that. Think about how different the human condition was before and after we discovered vaccines. So we learned about the body's immune system, and then we learned how to enhance the body's immune system, and we did away with smallpox and polio, and we significantly cut back on malaria. There are so many diseases that used to just terrorize and immiserate our ancestors. And the science of bodily immunity fundamentally changed that. It gave us a fighting chance against these little microbes that can really do nasty things to us. I think the science of mental immunity could bring about an equally dramatic transformation of the human condition. Imagine a world where we've all taken our critical thinking skills to a level where demagogues just don't even get the time of day. Like, nobody bothers to pay any attention to demagogic politicians because everybody can see that they're just spouting nonsense.
Mhm.
So we just ignore them into irrelevance. Wouldn't that be a wonderful world, right? What if we all developed our capacity to spot misinformation to the point where conspiracy theories just were a minor annoyance rather than a serious threat to democracies around the world? I think we can evolve our world to that point. And I'm really excited and optimistic about where cognitive immunology can take us. But it's going to take a lot of people all chipping in and helping us make it happen if we're going to bring about that world.
For sure. Andy, last time you were on the show, I asked you the question that I ask of all my guests, which is, what's a question that you wish you were asked more? But since this is your second time here, I have a different question to ask you, which is, as we wrap up, what is a question that is still left unanswered for you?
Hmm. So many of them out there. Hard to pick just one. Well, I would like to know how it's all going to turn out, right?
Well, yeah.
That's
We're talking about some different brain space there if you can figure that one out.
well, and I mean that not just in the global sense, but I wonder how this our attempt to address the world's mis and disinformation problem is going to play
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people say, time is short. This seems like an existential problem. Other people are saying, yeah, well, don't panic. Panicking doesn't help anybody. And who knows, AI might help us with this problem rather than make it worse.
Mm.
Yeah, maybe, but we're playing with some powerful forces here, and I really don't know how it's going to turn out.
So your question that left unanswered is, how does it all turn out? I
Yeah,
think that's a big philosophical question we could spend a whole lot of hours thinking about right now, Andy.
yeah, that's a bit of a cop out, but it felt like it fit there in that.
I hey, I think it fits and a wonderful place to leave it. Thank you so much for doing this again, Andy. I appreciate it. You always make me think.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for doing what you do, and keep up the great work.
I want to reiterate something that I said in the intro to this episode and this conversation with Andy, and make it the point or the focus that I hope you take away from this episode, which is that questioning your beliefs is not a search to figure out all that is wrong with your thinking. That's not the intention behind this. It's to shed light on potential blind spots you might not be aware of. And there's a very big difference there. That shades of gray thinking, that ability to shift your mindset just a degree or two in either direction when new information is presented to you, rather than putting up a wall and just saying, this doesn't exist. I'm not listening to this. I'm not considering this. This doesn't align. perfectly with my worldviews and my beliefs, that belief attachment is where we become susceptible to having our beliefs hijacked, because they become our identity. They become the end all be all when we layer that over decisions that we have to make. Just those degrees of difference in one way or the other that can provide us more nuance, that can provide us more complexity to get out of this simplification of very complex issues. That is what I mean. That is what Andy means when he talks about holding on to your beliefs lightly. It often does feel like a challenge, a personal affront. But that's not the intent, even though we both admit and recognize it can be very, very hard. But this is the crux, the foundation of the ask and see approach to conflict communication that I talked about in a previous episode, that I write about in my book. The ask, then see approach requires us to get into this mindset. And that's what ask talks about. Ask is assume positive intent. It is set aside your ego, and K is know that you can't know everything. That's what makes up the letters of ask. And then C is search yourself, explore other perspectives, exchange your curiosity with others. It is getting in this framework or mindset of not having to have all the answers all the time. And that doesn't mean that you're wrong. So that is what I want you to take away from this conversation, this episode. That is the communication lesson to be heard and to be told through this conversation. I want to thank Andy Norman for rejoining the show. Always great to talk to Andy, even if we don't agree on everything. That's the beauty of the conversations that we have. There is a deep level of respect between Andy and I absolutely love talking to him. He challenges me, and I know he's told me before my questions have challenged him as well. And we get a little philosophical at times, but I love it. I absolutely do. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the conversation with Andy and the things that we talked about, please share this episode with your network and help Andy and I spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. Also, subscribe to this. Make sure you're subscribed so that you never miss when a new episode drops. It's every other week on Mondays. It's pretty straightforward and self-explanatory, but you never know if I sneak in a bonus episode there. So subscribe and always be notified when the latest content drops. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always go to my website, michaelashford.com, and reach out there, or you can email me at michael@thefollowupquestion.com. That's it for this episode. I will catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question. And until then, keep asking questions.